Sponsored by New Orleans Distillers, creators of fine spirits and liqueurs. Through dedication to science, art, and passion, blends of tradition and flavor emerge. For you, always locally crafted. New Orleans Distillers, classically Southern.
Tonight, inflation is getting higher. This week, the markets are dropping, and the masks are coming off literally and figuratively. That and more tonight on Wall Street Wrap-Up. Hi, and welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up, and I hope your week went well. I'm Andre Laborde. Our goal is bringing Wall Street to your street for today, Friday, May the 14th, 2021, and to get you ready for the events ahead for next week. We've got a great show for you this evening, so stick around. We'll also be talking with the former CEO of Medtronics, author and Harvard Business School professor Bill George. He's helping with training CEOs on how to handle the media and others concerning the Georgia's election laws and other things, and the woke economy and boycotting of products, ESG investing, and so much more. That's coming up. But first, how did the markets do this week? All the averages closed in the green today. The Dow Jones Industrial Average ended the week at 34,384. That was up 363 points for the day, but down about just over 1% for the week. The S&P 500 closed today at 4,174, up 61 points for the day and down about 1.4% for the week. And finally, the NASDAQ. They finished the week at 13,429, up 305 points for the day and down about 2.3% for the week. The Dow Jones, the S&P 500, and the NASDAQ all posted sector highs, and the S&P 500 had its best day since March 26th, and the NASDAQ had their best day since March the 11th. And Bitcoin? Well, they closed for the week, ending today at $50,270, up almost $1,400 for the day, but it was down about $7,000 for the week. Well, let's get to our guest tonight. Bill George. He's an accomplished author, a CEO of a publicly traded company, and presently professor at Harvard Business School Senior Fellow. Bill, welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up.
Andre, thank you for inviting me on your show.
One of the things you do is you help CEOs today that when they get into the C-suite, whether they be the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer, or the CEO, how to work with the media. Do you find that CEOs may know the product or the service of the company they're running, but do they know how to work with the press?
You don't get to be CEO of a major company unless you know how to run the business and you know everything about the business. But for most part, they've been shielded by that, either by their PR department or by what's behind the scenes. And so today, the media wants you out there. They don't want to hear from your PR department. They certainly don't want to hear from a PR firm. They want to talk to you, not a subordinate. And so I think you've got to be out there. And, but when you do, Andre, just be yourself. Just be natural. Just like we're having a conversation now. You don't need to put on airs. You don't need to say things a certain way. You don't need to hold yourself uptight. A lot of CEOs are pretty uptight because they're afraid they're going to get nailed. No, treat people well. You have a job to do. I have a job to do. So let's talk.
Do they worry that whichever decision they make, and I'll tell you, I'm going right now, I'm thinking about Ed Bastian, Delta CEO, or James Quincy, the CEO of Coca-Cola, with the recent situations of the Georgia voting law. When I'm asking these questions, that's what's in the back of my mind. That if they say that they're against the Georgia law, then they're going to alienate half the people. If they say no comment, they're alienating some people. And if they say they're for the new voting law, they're worried that are the other side going to come back down on them. Is that something that's always in the back of their minds when doing the interview?
Absolutely. And, we live in a split world today. There's no way to avoid it. And so I tell CEOs, speak your truth from your heart and what's consistent with your company's beliefs and your values and your mission. And I'll just go back to Ed Bastian. I have great admiration for Ed. About 3 years ago, he had decided to end discounts for NRA members. I think there were all of 13 that took those. And some of the Georgia legislators got upset and said he shouldn't get involved in gun control issues. So we're going to take away a $38 million tax benefit they get to give them credit against their fuel charges. And you know, he said he stepped up and he said Delta's values are not for sale. And in this latest situation, Delta felt an obligation to speak on behalf of their employees. Ed has been great with his employees. That's why I fly Delta, because employees are so highly motivated and the service rates are so far above American and United. That's why I fly Delta.
Hmm.
But the same thing with Jim Quincy. He's not a kind of out there guy, a very authentic person. But he felt a need to speak out and say, this is wrong. We want our employees to have ease of access to the polls. We want everyone to vote. Every American citizen should be able to vote who's over 18. So I admire this. Now, there's a third case right there in Atlanta. Craig Manier, Home Depot said nothing. And, you know, they organized a boycott against him. Of course, they wanted to boycott Delta and Coca-Cola, which didn't go anywhere. But, you know, can you afford not to speak out when you got 400,000 employees like Craig does? So I think your employees are looking to know, where does my leader stand and what does my company stand for? And it's actually deeper than that, Andre. Today, the millennials don't want to work for a company that doesn't have a real sense of purpose and doesn't carry it out. They want to know, work for a company that's making a difference, that stands for something. That's where they want to work. That's what motivates them.
Well, there's one CEO that for a company that said that he sent an email to all of his employees, or a company letter, and said that you're fine to talk on social media about your political views or however you feel, but as far as on company time, I ask that all political talk is not to be discussed. And he also said if anybody does not feel comfortable with that, he will totally understand. And I think he said, I'll even give you, and if you decide to leave, I'll give you like 1 month severance pay or 2 months severance pay.
Really?
Do you remember that? I mean, it was about a month ago that it occurred. So
Well,
one CEO went just even the other way and said, no political water cooler talk, for
Well, I understand that. You're on the job to do a job, and it shouldn't be a whole political thing. But see, the CEO's in a different role. He or she is representing the company. And someone asked me, well, are you representing yourself when you say this? Or are you representing the company? And I said they're one and the same, because people look at you as the representative of the company. You are the top person in the company. When you speak, like it or not, you're speaking for the company. So I've worked with a couple of CEOs, two in particular, who had religious views that was much against marriage equality and same-sex marriage. And I know exactly where their churches believe. I know what they believe. But on the job, they were for LGBT rights. They funded LGBT groups. They were very supportive. They actually terminated employees and people who were homophobic or said inappropriate things about gays and lesbians. And so it's really interesting. They made that split between, when I'm here on the job, I'm speaking this. And so they're speaking in public. They know they're representing their company.
I understand. What about also, in addition to the press today, Bill, that you have investment companies, and I'm thinking of BlackRock right now. BlackRock,
Right.
with Larry Fink as the CEO. And for our viewers, BlackRock holds mutual funds that a lot of your retirement funds and such are involved in BlackRock. Well, they hold millions and millions of shares. Well, now once a year, Larry Fink puts out a letter for his annual letter, and he goes after CEOs for what's now known as ESG, environmental, social, government, feelings for that, or climate control, or things that he feels that CEOs. So in addition to working with media, how do you feel that they should work with activist investors, whether they be hedge funds or asset managers like BlackRock?
Well, I have great admiration for Larry Fink. We've had him come to our class. I know him. He's the largest fund manager in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's in a powerful position. He has used that appropriately to say every company should have a mission. You're in business to serve society. And you have to say, how are you serving society? And I want to see it written up. I want you to tell us, how are you serving society, and come forward with that. And I want to know how your strategy backs that up and how you carry that forward. And so he has done that, and I think very much just credit. And a lot of CEOs, he sends that letter out to 500 people every year. They really take that seriously, and that has turned the tide, I think, to move away from shareholder primacy, where we're only thinking about maximizing shareholder value and what the stock price closed today, and thinking about how do we build a great company and how do we build long-term shareholder value because we serve our customers better, as I used in the Delta example. Or Coca-Cola, we have more innovation in our products, and so we can grow faster. And because our employees get excited about that, they don't get excited about maximizing shareholder value. They don't know how to do that. They do know how to serve customers. They know how to be innovative and create great products.
You have a unique position because you've been the CEO of Medtronics. You've been board
Mhm.
member. You hold board seats, everything from Goldman Sachs to ExxonMobil to Target to a number of positions, and you've also been chairman of the board. Now, when you're the CEO, you're in charge of the company. When you're on the board, you're in charge of the CEO, and the chairman of the board is in charge of the board. But when you have a CEO that's both CEO and chairman, what kind of pressure, if you're a board member and you're not happy with the conduct or the leadership of the CEO, do you go to the chairman and say that he's not doing a good job?
Well, if Andre, in Europe, these jobs are almost always split.
Hmm.
And although I did serve on the board of Novartis when they were combined, and then they went back to being split. In the U.S., most of the major companies have a combined, but they have to have a very strong lead director. My colleagues, Jay Lorsch, worked with at Harvard, and Marty Lipton came up with this idea of the lead director. So you have to have a strong lead director. I'll give you a good example. At Goldman Sachs, Lloyd Blankfein was chair and CEO for the entire time he was CEO at 12 years. But Bayo Angalese was the lead director, and I have great respect for Bayo, and he did a fantastic job. Frankly, he was everything. He was chair, everything except the title. And so he did that job very well, and he separated and helped us very much in how we built the board and who we took, bringing more women on the board and more people of color and diversifying the board. He did a fantastic job. So he was everything. I was going to say he's everything except the title of chairman. So you have an executive session, and when you have an executive session without the CEO present, the lead director runs that, and that's really an important session because that's where people tend to open up. They don't open up in an open meeting with 10 managers in the room. They just won't. And so if you want to know where boards are, you never know until you how they operate until you go into an executive session of the board. That's where you find out.
I understand. And when you were talking just now, what I was thinking of Jeff Immelt from General
Yeah.
Electric. Now, when Jack Welch was in charge, he was CEO and chairman, and I was thinking of Ken Langone. Now, for our viewers, Ken Langone, along with Bernie Marcus and also Arthur
Right.
Blank, the three of them formed, and you mentioned a little bit earlier, Home Depot. Well, Jack Welch put Ken Langone on the board. And from what I
Yeah.
understand, and I'm not telling tales out of school because he said this, Ken Langone said this publicly, that he said something about GE that Jeff Immelt, who then later took over as both CEO and chairman, didn't like. And he got a call from Jeff Immelt and said, Ken, you're off. Now, personally, if I was fired by Jeff Immelt, I would add that as my resume. Okay, but
Well, honestly, if you're talking about board members,
yeah,
the chairman and CEO cannot fire a board member. Lord Blankfein could not fire me from the Goldman board. Not that he would, but he couldn't do that.
uh-huh.
If we're unhappy with a board member, then we need to talk to the board in private session about that confidentially, and need to talk to individual board members, sound them out. No, I don't think that's appropriate that you ever do anything like that. You better listen to your board. Listen, boards are hard to deal with. Everyone says, "Oh, it's great to be CEO. Now I'm the boss." Well, guess what? You got 11 bosses, and so you better listen to all 11 people because one director that's really unhappy with you can really stir the pot in executive session. So you listen to that, and sometimes that recalcitrant. I had one director who wouldn't approve an acquisition we were talking about. He was right, and I listened to him carefully and talked to him, called him up on a weekend, and we pulled the acquisition off the table after talking to him because he knew more about that industry than anyone that we were going to acquire this company from. And so he was right. So you better listen to your directors, your board members, but you don't tell them what you do not hire and fire board members. I'll tell you that. And if you want somebody off the board, you better tread very lightly on that. I don't recommend CEOs do that unless there's a general consensus that this person's not pulling his or her weight.
Well, that's what kind of surprised, and for people who know of Ken Langone, and by the way,
He's a
working with
strong
his
guy, by
office
the way.
of getting him on, of having him as a guest. So, I mean, I don't have a date yet, but I'm talking with his office at this time. Yeah, Ken is not an introverted person, so
No, he's certainly not.
and he is just the opposite of that. So when he got the phone call from Jeff Email to say you're now off, you know, I don't think Jeff really thought it through and through as to what's going on, and
Yeah.
Jeff Email really didn't. I mean, what Jack Welch started a GE at what 14-15 billion dollar market cap company to bringing it to 500-600 billion, and then when Jeff Email got it at 500-600 billion, and when he was finished 17 years or so later, it went down to 100 billion. You know, went the other way. So
Well, Andre, let me say, since you brought it up twice, I'm going to say it. My father used to say, "Son, watch GE." And their company is always ahead of the times. And when I went to Honeywell, Ed Spencer, my CEO boss, said, "Watch GE, they're way ahead of the times." This is the greatest business tragedy of my lifetime. It's not an ethical tragedy. Enron was
yeah,
never a real company. Those are ethical tragedies.
yeah.
And it's not that, but it is to see the destruction of what was once a truly great company. Okay, they got three businesses now. They're good businesses. They could spin them all off and have GE jet engines, and and these are all good businesses, Andre. But it's a tragedy what's happened there. I think they lost their soul. They closed their headquarters. They closed Grotonville, moved up to Boston. I think they kind of lost their soul. GE was always a management factory everyone wanted to hire people from. You don't hear that today.
And very good point, because those that did not make the cut for Jack Welch when he decided who was going to succeed him,
Yeah,
all the 3 or 4 people that were up for
that's
running
right.
GE immediately got job offers from everywhere. I mean, Home Depot got Bob Nardelli, and I forget where the others went, but
Well,
and
Jim
Honeywell.
McNerney went to 3M and then later to Boeing. So yeah,
Just recently, there was Facebook had an oversight. You know what? I'll tell you what. We're going to take a break. Just notice the clock. We're taking a break. We're going to talk. We're talking right now with Bill George. We'll be right back right after this message. We're back right now. We're talking with Bill George. Bill, glad to have you back. Bill, right before going into a break, I was going to ask you about social media today. You know, we've talked about the press. We've talked about, hedge funds that are maybe irritating to a CEO. Well, today you've got Facebook, you've got Instagram, you've got Twitter, all these different. And this past week, they were talking about, in this case, Donald Trump, of whether or not he should be banned entirely from Facebook. So what Mark Zuckerberg did was he had an oversight board to basically say, I'm not going to touch it. I'm going to let them decide. Well, they basically punted and gave it back to Mark Zuckerberg, saying, well, you didn't give us enough rules and regulations. Do you think that was the right move on Mark Zuckerberg's side, or do you think that was the right move on the oversight board?
well, first of all, Mark's had a whole series of missteps when it comes to values. He has never been clear about his values and Facebook's values. It seems like the only value is adding more, more followers, more people on Facebook, and keeping them on as long as they can. And so he really flubbed the Cambridge Analytica situation, and so he's made some big mistakes. And I think this is a kind of rear guard action he was doing to try to get himself back in better shape with those people. And but it was okay to have a review. It's no different like a review panel from the FDA reviews a Medtronic product or the Pfizer vaccine. That's okay. But the final decision is the FDA. The final decision is Mark Zuckerberg. So they didn't. People said they punted. No, he's the CEO. He's the majority shareholder in comes to voting shares.
Right.
He's got to make that call. He can't turn it over to them and say that's a final decision.
It
by his
reminded
shareholders.
it reminded me like when you're little and you ask your mother for something and say, "Go ask your father," and you ask your father, you say, "Well, go ask
Right,
your mother."
exactly.
You know,
He was
make a
ducking.
decision.
So I don't blame that was a very good board, by the way, and they did a very thoughtful analysis. But they were right. He said vaguely, "Well, he's indefinitely banned." They said,
Mhm,
"You need to define what that means.
mhm.
And you need to tell us, have some clarity." And that's kind of that kind of waffling or weasel wording. I don't like that anyway. If you're going to be banned, if you're going to be suspended, say it.
Yeah.
Jack Dorsey's been much clearer over Twitter.
Do you think companies like the ones we were just talking, the social medias, Facebook, Twitter, others, are they, and when I say private companies, I know they're publicly traded and they're not government controlled, except for Section 230, but do you think they are private companies to the part of, 100 years ago, Bell Telephone was a private company. But because they were thought of as a utility, because so many people use the Bell telephone as a communications device, they were regulated. Do you think companies such as the ones that we're just talking about, Twitter, Facebook, and such, Google, should be regulated? Or do you think they're right with the Section 230? What are your thoughts on that?
A number of these companies have two-tier voting of their shares. And in the case of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg controls more than 50% of the voting shares,
Mhm.
just a fraction of the total shares. I think that's not a good thing. I think it puts too much power in the hands of one person. If he is 100% owner, that's one thing. But I think it's time for him to rethink his whole governance structure and not have a board of advisors that built some much stronger people. Google's tried to make that transition quite successfully, and they've done that. So, do I think social media companies should be regulated? Absolutely. Do I think there should be a privacy requirement? Yes. If you're going to take and use my information, what you should do is first time, as soon as I sign up, put up two icons on the screen. This icon says opt in. That means you can use my information. I don't care. This one says opt out. Okay, now, Mr. George, you're going to have to pay $9.99 a month, kind of the same cost you pay, same price you pay Apple for iTunes. And so, for $9.99 a month, you can use our site, and then we won't use your private information. I just think there ought to be privacy. Look, the Europeans put it through 2-3 years ago,
Mhm.
the general data regulation. So our Congress has been stalemate, as they are about just everything.
You know,
But they need to have clear regulations about the ground rules. Social media companies have enormous power in our society today. And I'm not against size. I'm not saying break up Amazon because they've been so successful. But, Facebook gets things from Instagram and WhatsApp, and then they use those names and that information through the Facebook site. And I really have questions about that. Yeah, I think there ought to be regulations, clearly.
Bill, you know the old saying, if something is free, you are the product. So that's how,
And Zuckerberg says that, but I don't think a lot of people realize that, particularly younger people
yeah.
that don't realize the things they're doing and saying on Facebook can come back to haunt them 10 years later. Look how people are going back now and checking out things people said a long time ago.
Mhm.
Maybe they use inappropriate language for people of color, and they're getting hit with that pretty hard. So I think
Yeah.
this requires a real rethinking. But it's not fair to people that come in that site thinking, well, no one's going to know.
Yeah.
Actually, all that information today is in the electronic world. Everyone has all the information. I can't say anything to you and say, well, Andre, don't tell anyone I said that on your show. Of course, it's all public.
Phil Pulver, sure. I've got time for just like one more question. I have so many, I haven't even scratched the surface. Let me give you a scenario. What year do you think we're thinking of? Let's say there's long lines to the gas pumps, and hoping when you get to the gas pump that there's enough gas in the pumps to fill your tank, and you spend hours waiting. You've got tension in the Middle East. You have fear of runaway inflation. You have heavy crime in New York City and in other major cities. Is this like they said, deja vu all over again? It's the only thing
You
this thing
just
is
described
there.
1979 and 1980 when President Carter, and I have a huge regard for President Carter,
Uh-huh.
but that was the scene he faced, and
Yeah.
that cost him the presidency in the 1980 election to Ronald Reagan. And then they took very harsh measures, went into a recession, got rid of the inflation, and kind of settled some of the things, the Iran hostage crisis. And frankly, have now opened up a lot of the oil and gas rights in the U.S. So that now we have adequate amount of energy, and we're really not energy dependent on the Middle East, which I think is a good thing. Hopefully, we're going to shift more to renewables. It's moving pretty fast with wind and solar, and I'm very pleased about that. Did you have a different year in mind?
No, you're exactly. I was going to ask you if you had a three-piece white suit in the closet that you that you could dust off, or like John Travolta, or.
Well, I'm glad we're moving in a new era, but we got a lot of problems in this era, and I don't think most Americans would hope to ever see January 6th repeated, the insurrection at the Capitol, when our democracy is very much at stake. And one of the reasons a lot of CEOs got involved in Georgia voting rights is because they think all over the country, with 360 laws being promulgated to make voting more difficult for people, though the CEOs I know, boy, and they are not just all liberals or woke as they're being accused of being. There are many people to the right of center. They may not be far conservatives, but they're to the right of center. And they think our democracy is at stake. And frankly, Andre, I agree with them. When somebody like Ken Frazier, who's a wildly successful CEO of Merck, or Ken Chenault, who did a fabulous job with American Express, say, without democracy, capitalism cannot survive. Sure, Andre, we can go to Chinese capitalism, crony capitalism like Putin has in Russia. We don't want that. We want a free market capitalism here. And so you have to stand up to your investors, activist investors, silent investors, whomever, if you're going to be a public company. But that's a good thing. It brings a certain discipline, if you will, to your leadership, and know that you've got to be beholden in the end. And of course, I'm a great believer that your job as CEO is to create long-term shareholder value, and you do that by serving your customers well and your employees well, and living in a healthy community.
Bill, I sure appreciate it. Unfortunately, the clock never stops. I hope you come back.
Yes.
The time flies by.
Thank you for your time. It's a privilege to be with you. Anytime, just give me a call.
My thanks to Bill George. What a guest. Well, if you've got a question about finance or a comment about the show, we'd love to hear from you. You can write us at andre@wallstreetwrapup.info. Keep it pithy or concise, and we'd be glad to answer your questions. And now for a look ahead for next week. But first, on this day, May the 14th in 1804, what two explorers departed St. Louis, Missouri for a 2-year exploration of the United States? We'll have the answer in just a minute, so stay tuned. On this day, May the 14th in 1804, what two explorers departed St. Louis, Missouri for a 2-year exploration of the United States? The answer? Lewis and Clark. Arriving back 2 years later after exploring the Northwest from Mississippi River to the Pacific Ocean, started out on this day, May the 14th. Well, join me next week when my guest next week will be options trader, author, and co-founder of Nigerian Advisors, John Nigerian. Now, you might remember him also when he played for the NFL for the Chicago Bears before starting his financial career. That's John Nigerian next week. Well, that's our show. Hope you've enjoyed it for this Friday, May the 14th. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook and WYES.org. So thank you for joining us for Wall Street Wrap-Up. I'm Andre Laborde. Remember, money never sleeps. Good night.
Sponsored by New Orleans Distillers, creators of fine spirits and liqueurs. Through dedication to science, art, and passion, blends of tradition and flavor emerge. For you, always locally crafted. New Orleans Distillers, classically Southern.